Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. If Kimi Antonelli wins any of his first Grand Prix in the sport, he will break Max Verstappen's record as the youngest ever Grand Prix winner. That seems rather unlikely, but if the car is as good as Mercedes think it is, Antonelli has come up with quite the couple of statements over the last couple of days, suggesting his ruthlessness this season will try and rival what Verstappen has done over the last few years. Antonelli is speaking a big game going into the new season, and if the car's any good, Antonelli intends to deliver that on the track as soon as possible. Let's not forget when Hamilton made his debut at a top team at McLaren in 2007, the move that he made at turn 1 around the outside of Fernando Alonso. Will Antonelli be able to replicate something similar? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Loads to get into today on the driver side as well, starting here. So Cadillac, they're coming in next year, 2026. They're going to have a car. It's going to be Ferrari powered, and they're going to have 2 drivers in that car. Now, Cadillac want it, at least in part, to be American. They're talking about having an American driver in there on merit. They're talking about having a truly American team, and clearly Colton Herta is going to be on the radar. Andretti, IndyCar guy, and he was nearly in Formula 1. Well, he wasn't really, but he was at least considered for the AlphaTauri team a couple of years ago. Then super licenses kind of got in the way. It's still a question mark now, but they're confident that Herta can secure it in IndyCar this year. Of course, the other big names really are Bottas, Perez, potentially. I think that Bottas is the name that many would go for. Like, if you're looking for an experienced driver, most of the fans would probably say, like, get Bottas rather than, let's say, Perez or Zhou. But the advantage that, let's say, a Zhou has, and even a Perez over a Bottas, is that they bring serious sponsorship dollars more than Bottas might. And that's the thing. What are Cadillac trying to achieve in their first year? Colton Herta is probably going to get a chance. Exciting American younger driver. He's not young, but of the other American options, there's not too many, I think, that make that much sense for Cadillac. So Herta is definitely in the driving seat, as it were. But the second driver, you'd expect Bottas would make a lot of sense. But as I say, if you are going to bring in a more experienced driver, maybe Cadillac will feel that some of the sponsorship dollars from Perez, or even from a guy like Zhou, and also Zhou is still Ferrari backed, he's still a reserve driver for them, and Cadillac are having Ferrari engines. So, as good as Bottas may be compared to those guys, in my opinion, it is not at all clear that he gets that drive. There's been lots of talk about it. Even Will Buxton, of course, now working on the IndyCar side, he was giving his perspective on the situation as well. Now, speaking of the drivers, this, if it wants to load, was a pretty remarkable announcement today. I don't know what Alpine are cooking and why, but they've confirmed today another test and reserve driver. You guys may know Kush Miney's been around, Formula 2 and stuff over the last several years. But what is going on here, right? Because Alpine have Franco Colapinto. He's their primary reserve driver for now. They have Paul Aron. He's another reserve driver. They have, I think it's Ryo Hirakawa, who used to be a McLaren man. Now he's an Alpine man. So, I might walk out the door in a few seconds' time and Flavio Briatore is standing right there and trying to sign me up as an Alpine reserve driver, because it seems like they're targeting everyone right now. And they have 4. Why do they need 4? I don't really know. I guess the plan is that they can send them elsewhere if necessary and, invest in talented drivers that maybe bring in some sponsorship money as well. And then they can use them for something or other. Not really sure. But 4 reserve drivers, especially because probably at some point this season, we are going to see Doohan out, Colapinto in, at which point there's going to be more changes. But, what would have to happen to Aron and Miney and Colapinto, or for those guys to even get a drive, right? Because how often are reserve drivers required, and they're needing 4 of them? So yeah, confusing decisions. Colapinto's manager, by the way, was talking about the whole Doohan Colapinto thing and was like, I can't believe all this abuse that Doohan's getting, it's so unfair. And that's fair enough. But equally, is Colapinto's manager going to be like, poor Doohan, man, I guess we should let him keep the seat for a little while? No, his job is to get Colapinto that drive, and it's probably going to happen. Speaking of drivers, this was a big story of the day, actually. So Daniel Ricciardo, no longer in Formula 1, probably never will be any longer. We've talked about the Cadillac seats. It seems like Ricciardo's kind of played down his possibilities of coming back there. I think he recognises that his potential chance to get into the Red Bull, that was his chance to kind of keep his dream alive in Formula 1 of becoming a world champion. That didn't happen, of course, and therefore he decided when the time was up that maybe it's time to call it a day. But when Liam Lawson got the drive at Red Bull, apparently the only driver to reach out to him and congratulate him was Danny Ric, which is, well, it's not massively surprising that Ricciardo reached out to him and said congrats. Obviously, they had a bit of a relationship before. I guess what's more surprising is that nobody else said congratulations, right? Like the fact that Danny Ric is messaging him and saying, you know, well done, hope you do well against Max and all this. Like, did Max say anything? Was Max like, oh, congrats, Liam, you know, welcome to the show? Maybe, you know, you'd presume as teammates that Max might have said something. Maybe Lawson's talking about other drivers, but he says, look, past or present, Daniel was the only one who said congrats on getting the drive. Look, I'm not surprised that Yuki didn't have anything to say, but you might have expected someone else to have a couple of comments. But no, Ricciardo gets the praise for that one, and I thought that was fair enough. This is a quick update as well if you guys are looking to go to the Las Vegas Grand Prix or even went previously. This year, in terms of ticket sales, it did not deliver the results that they were hoping for. And these are the numbers that they're changing that into. So reportedly, it's going to be a $50 Thursday ticket, of course, for a couple of practice sessions. Typically, that would be Friday, but it's late night there in Vegas. That's the time zone they do. $100 for Friday and then $300 for the Grand Prix. So these tickets, to me, seem a bit more reasonably priced than usual. Sure, there's going to be the grandstand pricing. There's going to be some of the VIP pricing, no doubt. But in terms of making it more accessible for like normal fans, I don't really know if this is going to convince many of you guys to go, but it's at least an attempt, I guess, from Liberty Media to try and level things up in terms of what they were doing in Las Vegas. But it's Australia that all the talk is about this week, because we're just a couple of days away from the cars hitting the track for practice. Here's Hamilton's garage, with, of course, the McLaren garage just next door. The weather, by the way, continues to look very interesting. Now, it depends who you ask what it looks like on the Sunday. Some weather reports have got it up to, 90% chance of rain or something in that ballpark. I will say the rain looks like, if it is going to happen on the Sunday, maybe a little bit heavier even than it was previously predicted. I also think that one of the other things to note here is that if it's true that it's going to go from 37 degrees and sweltering hot for qualifying down 12 degrees, maybe more, for the next day and even the Monday, if the race was about to get delayed, but that's not going to happen. The temperature drops off even more. So it's going to be really interesting, right? Like, let's say the Mercedes is actually very quick in the cooler conditions, but not so in the hotter conditions as it was last year. Then maybe they're going to love the Grand Prix but hate qualifying. Who knows? Maybe there's a car that's like that. It might not be the Mercedes this time. But, we're not that far away from the race now. And I know that weather conditions can change and predictions can change, sure. It may happen differently to this. But for a few days now, the likelihood of this happening is increasing, and I think that does add to the possibility of the chaos. Max Verstappen may be well positioned to take advantage of that after his masterclass in Brazil last year, but of course he's not the only driver who is excellent in the wet, but he is a bit concerned about some of the circuits this year. Certainly, for example, Singapore, that has caused Red Bull problems in the past. Max gave his thoughts the other day on the curbs and the bumps still causing some problems for the Red Bull. Not ideal, really, when they'd have hoped to have fixed basically all their issues. But even Red Bull before the test, they were talking about how they hope that they fix some of their issues, kind of resigns to the fact that they're not going to have a perfect car, and maybe a car that's not good enough to beat McLaren unless for extenuating circumstances. This is even what Autosport came up with. Now, who knows what's actually right here? These are their predictions. Sauber's the last team, McLaren's the first team, everything in between is a mess. Honestly, I don't really disagree massively with the rankings. I think the 2, 3, 4 are just super difficult to call. I mean, who has the most problems? I guess that's the question, really. Who's got the most performance? Who's got the most problems? Right now, the Mercedes might be there, and this is what we're going to discuss in a second on the Mercedes side, is that Autosport have Mercedes as the second fastest team. They probably don't have the highest performance ceiling out of these 4 teams. They may have a lower performance ceiling than Red Bull and Ferrari, but based on the test, they seems to understand the concept better. They could get more out of it than Ferrari and Red Bull could. So we'll see what happens, of course, when we turn up to Australia, but it's definitely raised the question here as to how much of an impact Antonelli could have, because if Mercedes is actually the second fastest team at the start of the season, who knows if they're going to be able to keep that going. Maybe all of a sudden it's Mercedes back to form and they are the closest challenger this year to McLaren, and it's a Mercedes 1-2 in terms of power unit specifications. Of course, there's concern that McLaren are the best. We've discussed that at length over the last few days, and Norris, I will say, is speaking in a very confident manner. Of course, McLaren do have to deal with the fact that they are the favourites, right? There is no excuses this season. They seemingly have the best car. They have a very serviceable driver pairing. they have maybe questionable decision making from a strategy perspective. I'm not sure if Lando and his radio engineers, like race engineers, radio communication is going to change much, because last year that was certainly a question mark for me. But still, Lando says, I feel good, I feel ready to get going. But even whether we have an amazing start or a bad start, that doesn't set up the season. As we proved last year, we can come from a long way back. So yeah, McLaren ready and confident, of course, but they will look to capitalise at the start of the season, obviously, because after Spain, the changes of the flexible wings, who knows what's going to happen. Lando went on to say this is the most confident I've been in the team, and probably the most confident I've been in myself. It's honestly not a big change, it's quite small, but I feel more prepared, I feel like a more complete driver than I've ever been. Achieving what we did last year makes you believe you can do it again. That belief is what gives you the most confidence. So, there's no doubt Lando is speaking like the championship favourite, and that he is on some respects. Whether he can execute, that is the question mark. And the question mark that I wanted to raise for you guys is around this man, Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Let's scroll up to the top. Here he is. Now, he's a kid, right? Fundamentally. Verstappen won his first Grand Prix when he was 18 years and I want to say like 7 months or something of age, something like that. Antonelli is 18 years currently and a few months of age. I think he turned 18 back in August, September time. So he has a few races if Antonelli wants to try and break Max Verstappen's youngest ever Grand Prix winner record. But it is worth keeping in mind that Antonelli is probably the most hyped up Italian driver in an incredibly long time. It will be a surprise to some that he's not driving for Ferrari, because that might make sense. But let's not forget, Mercedes signed Antonelli to their program when he was 12 years old, right? I think he was 12. They signed him in like 2018 or something, which I guess puts him at roughly 12. I don't know, something like that anyway. Kind of crazy, but that's how it is. And Ferrari do not tend to sign drivers that kind of young age. Ferrari will feel like, oh, well, Antonelli, if he's great, then he'll want to drive for us. That's how Ferrari are. And that is true. So it's not like Ferrari needed to sign it, but it's still kind of crazy this year that if Antonelli wins a Grand Prix, it'd be an insane story. But that would be the Italian national anthem back on the podium, and not for Ferrari for the first time in a rather long time. So, Antonelli is talking about his debut. And look, is he speaking a big game? Yeah, he's speaking a pretty big game here, which is exciting for the fan base in general, right? I think we want to see exciting rookies on the grid. And it's very rare anyway, you get a rookie in a car that might be quite good. I think the feeling halfway through last season was that, well, next year's Mercedes, as in this year's Mercedes, might not be very good. It's still going to be in kind of no man's land. So, no big deal putting a rookie into the car because you're not necessarily going to be in the championship fight. All of a sudden, some of the teams out there think, and some of the pundits think, that actually Mercedes have the best chance of fighting McLaren for this year's World Constructors' Championship. To me, I doubt that. I think it's more than likely going to be Ferrari. But still, who knows? Mercedes might be in the mix. They know there's performance to find, but who knows when McLaren have a difficult start to the season, whether that be due to reliability or due to weather conditions or due to, poor execution, or maybe the car isn't as good at other tracks as it was in Bahrain. Who knows? But Antonelli and Russell should be a strong pairing on paper. And we know what happened when Max and when Lewis and when other great drivers first came into the sport. It was pretty chaotic, right? Like, these guys in the early seasons were very raw. And you might expect Toto Wolff to have told Kimi, like, look, let's just take it easy first season, ease in and all this. And I'm sure that to some degree those conversations have been had. But there's no doubt that Antonelli wants to go in there and make an impression immediately. And if the car is capable of winning, that's what he's going to try and do. My feeling on Antonelli has been for some time, there's no way like he's going to outscore Russell in the drivers, in my opinion. It's possible. I mean, it's obviously possible. Like, Hamilton outscored Alonso in his debut year. But, back then was a bit different. You might say, oh, Hamilton was a bit older, which he was, and had loads of testing time, which he did. But Antonelli's also had loads of testing time as well. I think there will be weekends where Antonelli really shines, and there will be weekends when Antonelli's in the wall. I think that's how it's going to be. So, my belief on that he's not going to outscore Russell is mainly just due to consistency, not necessarily due to outright performance. But, Antonelli, of course, talked about various things about the team and the engineers and the setup and all this. But what I thought was most fascinating was the last sentence where they talked about the mentality that it takes to become a top Formula 1 driver, because if you're Antonelli, you've been hyped up for years, you're the #1 Mercedes Italian prospect in Formula 1, coming into what could be a very good car. The pressure is on to succeed, and succeed pretty damn quickly as well. And this is what Antonelli says: I've already noticed how ruthless Max is, the reigning 4-time world champion. For example, in FP1 in Mexico, I was preparing for this lap, and he pulled a brake on me right at the last sector of the last lap. You have no friends out there, he says. You have to be respected, because it's also a way to gain respect from others. Obviously respecting the rules, he says, but you have to show that you are not there to play, you are serious. Now, we heard similar words, I think, from Oscar Piastri over the last couple of seasons. When, I mean, you guys remember when he tangled with Hamilton back in Monza? When Hamilton, was going for the overtake, he squeezed Piastri wide, and I think Hamilton was probably expecting Piastri just to yield, but he didn't, and they made contact, and it was obviously a controversial moment at the time. Now, Piastri not yielding there sent a bit of a message to say, look, I'm not going to be pushed around by you more experienced drivers. And I think that Antonelli knows that he needs to do the same thing. Even if he's not competing for wins and championships and race wins and whatever, he wants to be competing for podiums bare minimum. But he knows that you can't just roll over, right? Like, you need to show that you're willing to get your elbows out against the top drivers. And some drivers figure this out far too late. Like, I think Lando Norris, it's, he's maybe getting it now, but even last season, Max was pushing him around a fair bit. That's not something that I think Max will be able to do to Antonelli if and when they come together on track a lot. Russell is not going to be pushed around. Hamilton, Leclerc, I think Piastri is not going to be pushed around. If Lando gets into that mode as well, I think he's, clearly the world championship favourite. But, he basically says, Antonelli, I intend to be ruthless this year in the way that Max Verstappen has been, which is quite the statement to make as an 18-year-old fresh-faced kid basically coming into the sport. So it's a message to Max, it's a message to the other drivers, it's a message to Russell. This I thought was pretty cool as well. So it turns out that Antonelli turned up to a go-karting track in Mykonos in Greece, the same go-karting track that Charles Leclerc had once turned up to, and he beat his lap time, right? So he beat the track record. Now, of course, karts aren't all the same, so, maybe there's a bit of an asterisk behind this, but I thought that was an interesting little anecdote to mention as well. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Just one final thing on Lewis Hamilton versus Charles Leclerc, because historically, at least as far as qualifying goes, this has been an excellent track for Hamilton, and not so much for Leclerc. I mean, it's kind of weird to think about because he had a Grand Slam here back in, a couple of years ago, 2022, so, it's obviously a track that he goes well at, but in terms of qualifying, Hamilton has 8 pole positions here and has out-qualified his teammate the majority of the time. Leclerc's quali head-to-head against teammates actually isn't particularly strong around this track, so I think it's going to be telling, right? Because if Hamilton out-qualifies Leclerc, then it's a big story, but let's say Hamilton has a really rough time against Leclerc when qualifying, then it's, maybe it looks worse than it otherwise would have done, but just something to keep your eyes on, really, in terms of it's a strong track for Hamilton, right? It's historically a very strong track for Hamilton. So, it could be a great start, or if he's struggling a bit, then it might, show some signs of weakness, really. From that Hamilton-Ferrari combination, but that's not really what I'm expecting. I think that in many respects, it could be the perfect track for Hamilton to debut with Ferrari. And as we know, he's taken pole position a lot of times when they've been as the season opener. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. These, by the way, are the, Planet F1 fan predictions for the Constructors' Championship. Mercedes aren't even on here. Red Bull are the third team, and then apart from that, it's McLaren and it's Ferrari. Kind of a 2-horse race on paper. But who knows? Maybe Mercedes can get themselves in the mix as well. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.